I'm calling the police right now!
Constance Blackwell screamed from her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, face red with fury as she jabbed a finger straight at me. I just smirked, loading another box into the moving truck. For what? Packing up my own stuff and leaving? 8 months of pure HOA hell. $200 fines for the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox, citations for excessive glare from my solar lights, 17 ridiculous violations total, including her wild claim that my IKEA patio set was now permanent community property and belonged to the neighborhood. Sirens wailed in the distance. She crossed her arms, smug as hell, convinced this was her ultimate victory. What she had no idea about? The game had already flipped in a way she could never imagine. In minutes, those cops would arrive, and everything would change. Her reaction? You won't believe it. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments and tell me what state you're watching from. Does yours top this? Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started, because trust me, you need the full story to appreciate just how sweet that moment was. 3 months earlier, I'd rolled into Maple Ridge Drive with nothing but a U-Haul, my military pension, and a dream of quiet retirement. Xavier Finley, 52, former Army logistics officer, recently divorced, looking for a fresh start in suburbia after 20 years of moving military families around the globe. I'd chosen this neighborhood specifically, 12 houses on a dead-end street built in the 70s, the kind of place where your biggest worry should be whether the Johnson's barbecue smoke drifts over your fence. Then I met the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator. Constance Blackwell appeared at my door within an hour of the moving truck's arrival. Picture this, 58 years old, retired bank manager who'd spent 8 years transforming our voluntary HOA into her personal empire. Silver hair so rigidly styled it could survive a Category 5 hurricane, always dressed like she was heading to foreclose on a children's hospital. The smell of her overpowering perfume, something expensive and suffocating, mixed with fresh mulch and diesel exhaust as she thrust a 47-page HOA handbook into my hands. "Welcome to Maple Ridge," she said with a smile that could freeze molten lava. "I'm Constance, your HOA president. Just wanted to ensure you understand our expectations." That handbook was a masterpiece of bureaucratic terrorism. Grass height regulations down to the quarter inch, 17 approved mailbox styles, each with specific installation requirements. Paint colors with names like Sanctioned Beige No. 3 and Approved Cream No. 7. Even garbage can rules, not visible before 6 p.m. on collection day, must be stored by 8 a.m. the following morning. "This is quite thorough," I said, the crisp pages crackling between my fingers like kindling. "We maintain the highest standards here." Her pale blue eyes studied me like I was a cockroach in her kitchen. "I trust that won't present difficulties for someone of your background." The way she said background made my jaw clench. Military training teaches you to recognize subtle hostility, and this woman was broadcasting it in surround sound. Trouble started immediately. Professional movers accidentally clipped a sprinkler head in the thin grass strip between sidewalk and street. Maybe $12 worth of damage. I offered to replace it on the spot. "That's community property," Constance snapped, materializing from her house like a perfectly coiffed missile. The sharp crack of her designer heels on concrete announced her approach before I saw her coming. "Destruction of HOA assets requires formal documentation and city notification. It was an accident. I'll upgrade the whole system if you want. The violation has occurred." She was photographing the broken sprinkler from every conceivable angle, camera flash firing like lightning in a storm. I replaced the sprinkler that afternoon, bought a better model, installed professional-grade fittings, even landscaped around it. 3 days later, destruction of community property, $500 fine, payable within 10 business days, for a $12 sprinkler head. That night, tasting bitter coffee and reading HOA bylaws until 2 a.m., I started researching. The original 1974 neighborhood charter showed voluntary membership. Constance had spent 8 years adding restrictions, each amendment tightening her stranglehold on the community. Always research original HOA covenants before buying. Many mandatory rules were added later without proper legal authority. I also discovered recent sales patterns. 3 families had fled in 2 years, all citing neighbor disputes. All sold below market to buyers connected with Constance's brother-in-law's real estate agency. But here's what gave me hope. Dorothy Weinstein, the 74-year-old widow next door, knocked on my door with homemade cookies and a knowing smile. "Don't let her intimidate you, honey," Dorothy whispered, glancing toward Constance's house. "Some of us have been waiting years for someone to fight back." Game on. The second violation notice arrived exactly 1 week later, hand-delivered by Constance herself at 7 a.m. sharp. I was barely awake, stumbling to my front door in pajamas and slippers, when she appeared on my porch like a bad omen in business casual. "Your lawn is non-compliant," she announced, waving an official-looking document with multiple photos attached. "What's wrong with my lawn?" I asked, squinting at the perfectly green grass I'd been watering religiously. "Improper grass variety. Our covenant requires pure Kentucky bluegrass. Your lawn contains fescue, which creates an uneven aesthetic that diminishes property values." I stared at her, then at my lawn, then back at her. The morning air carried the sweet smell of honeysuckle from Dorothy's fence, mixing oddly with Constance's aggressive perfume. "You can tell grass types just by looking?" I had it professionally tested. She produced a lab report from Premium Turf Analysis, which sounded about as legitimate as a degree from Trump University. Fescue content exceeds acceptable thresholds by 37%. The fine? $50 initial violation, plus $25 per day until corrected. Full lawn replacement, roughly $8,000, for grass that looked identical to everyone else's. That's when military training kicked in. 20 years of logistics work teaches you one thing. When someone's lying about the small stuff, they're definitely lying about the big stuff. I remembered reading somewhere that most HOA rules need consistent enforcement. You can't just target whoever pisses you off and ignore violations everywhere else. So I grabbed my camera and spent the afternoon documenting every lawn on Maple Ridge Drive. Door-to-door conversations with neighbors, casual questions about landscaping, detailed photos of every blade of grass on our street. The crunch of autumn leaves under my feet provided perfect cover as I gathered intelligence. What I found was beautiful. Dorothy's lawn was 40% clover, gorgeous white patches that she'd been cultivating for decades. The Hendersons had wildflower borders that attracted butterflies. And Constance's own prize-winning front yard featured a deliberate border of Dutch clover that violated her own grass purity obsession. I spent the next week building a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. 17 different violations across 11 houses, including our HOA presidents. The metallic taste of morning coffee fueled late-night research sessions as I dug through neighborhood bylaws, looking for the smoking gun. Found it buried in 2019 meeting minutes. Constance had changed the grass requirements without proper approval. Original bylaws required 8 homeowner votes for landscape amendments. Her grass rule passed with 5 attendees, including herself. Completely illegal. But here's where it got interesting. While I was building my grass case, I noticed something else in those financial records. Payments to Premium Turf Analysis and various consulting companies, all registered to people with Constance's last name. She wasn't just enforcing random rules, she was literally profiting from neighbor harassment. I compiled everything into a 15-page report and distributed copies to every house on the same day. The reaction was immediate and glorious. Dorothy called first, laughing so hard I worried she'd pull something. "Honey, you just kicked the hornet's nest with a steel-toed boot." The Hendersons knocked on my door by afternoon, grinning like lottery winners. "We've been waiting 5 years for someone with actual backbone," Janet said. "Did you know she tried fining us for incompatible rose colors? Apparently red roses next to pink ones create visual discord." By evening, I had recruited a small rebellion. 4 families ready to challenge Constance formally, 2 more willing to testify about harassment, and Dorothy organizing what she called Project Wildflower, deliberate violations planted in coordinated protest. The cherry on top came from public records research. Constance's mortgage was 3 months delinquent. Her escalating violation fees weren't about neighborhood standards. They were about funding her lifestyle while her own finances crumbled. Then she made her next move. While I was documenting her grass hypocrisy, Constance filed complaints with the city about my illegal business operations. My pickup truck still had old contracting logos from before retirement, and she claimed I was running a construction company from my garage. The sound of her heels clicking frantically on my driveway at dawn told me she thought she'd found her nuclear option. What she actually did was hand me more ammunition. City inspector came out, found 0 violations, and mentioned in his report that complainant appears to be filing frivolous claims. Now I had documented proof of harassment escalation. The taste of victory was sweeter than Dorothy's apple pie when I walked outside the next morning. Someone had planted "Constance's rules suck" in wildflower seeds across 3 different front yards. The neighborhood had officially declared war on its dictator, and I was just getting warmed up. Military logistics taught me patience, planning, and the art of letting your enemy destroy themselves. Constance was doing my job for me. Constance's revenge arrived on premium cardstock 3 days later, hand-delivered to every mailbox on Maple Ridge Drive. The paper felt expensive between my fingers. She'd actually invested in quality stationery to announce my destruction. Emergency HOA meeting. Commercial vehicle violations threatening community standards. My pickup truck, a perfectly legal personal vehicle with faded contractor logos from my pre-retirement side business, had somehow transformed into a commercial threat to residential zoning integrity. The woman had a gift for turning molehills into mountains, I'll give her that. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Mandatory attendance, business casual dress code. The smell of her desperation was getting stronger, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. But Constance had made a tactical error. While she was crafting her parking crusade, I'd been having coffee with Joey Martinez, our city's parking enforcement officer. 20 years of dealing with Constance's weekly complaint calls had worn the man's patience thinner than tissue paper. "She's been calling about your truck 3 times a week," Joey told me, the bitter taste of diner coffee sharp on my tongue. "Thing is, we've measured it 6 ways from Sunday. You're completely legal, man. She's wasting everyone's time." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos I'd taken that morning. Every vehicle on our street, measured and documented with military precision. The crisp autumn air had carried the distant sound of chainsaws while I worked, perfect background noise for gathering ammunition. "Joey, what would you say if our HOA president was filing false reports while violating the same laws herself?" His tired eyes suddenly sparked with interest. That's when I showed him Constance's white Lexus SUV, parked 18 inches too close to the corner stop sign for the past 6 months. Municipal violation, $50 fine. Margaret's boat trailer blocking the sidewalk on weekends. The Pattersons' RV extending into the street during football season. "You could write tickets for half this street," Joey muttered, studying my photos. "But she only complains about you." Thursday's kangaroo court was packed. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that sickly institutional glow that makes everyone look guilty. Constance had mobilized her network. Faces I'd never seen filled every folding chair, the rough fabric scratching as people shifted nervously. "We're here tonight," Constance announced, standing behind a folding table decorated with enlarged photos of my truck, "to address a serious threat to our residential character." She'd prepared an actual PowerPoint presentation about my pickup truck, complete with property value studies and visual impact assessments that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Commercial vehicles create noise pollution, attract criminal elements, and devastate home values," she declared, clicking to a slide showing my truck photoshopped next to actual construction sites. "We must act before this infection spreads." The room murmured approval. I sat quietly in the back, notebook balanced on my knee, letting her build her own gallows with PowerPoint slides and manufactured outrage. Then she spring-loaded her trap. "I motion for emergency parking restrictions prohibiting all commercial vehicles, work trucks, and recreational vehicles from residential areas. Violation fines, $200 per day, with HOA authority to tow repeat offenders." That's when I stood up, the metal folding chair scraping against linoleum. "Point of order," I said, my voice slicing through the murmur like a blade through silk. "Before voting on new restrictions, shouldn't we address existing violations by current board members?" Dead silence. Constance's face cycled from confident to confused to something approaching terror as I walked forward, manila folder in hand. "I spent this week documenting every parking violation on Maple Ridge Drive," I announced, spreading photographs across her presentation table like evidence in a murder trial, including President Blackwell's illegally parked vehicle, which has violated Municipal Code Section 47C for 6 consecutive months. The sharp gasp from Margaret's direction told me she'd spotted her boat trailer in the evidence pile. But the real beauty was watching Constance's hired lawyer, the one she'd paid to draft the commercial vehicle ban, quietly gather his papers and slip toward the exit. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out Joey's business card, Parking Enforcement Officer Martinez has confirmed that filing false violation reports constitutes harassment under municipal code. President Blackwell has filed 23 false reports about my legally parked vehicle. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. People started whispering, examining my photos, doing math in their heads about their own potential violations. Constance tried to regain control, shouting about coordinated attacks and outside interference, but her voice cracked like thin ice. The meeting dissolved into chaos as neighbors realized their HOA president had been weaponizing city services for personal vendettas. As people filed out, Dorothy grabbed my elbow, her grip surprisingly strong. "Honey, you just backed that woman into a corner. Cornered animals bite." The hollow echo of folding chairs being stacked told the whole story. Constance's credibility was crumbling, her legal authority questioned, her financial pressure mounting. But desperate people make dangerous decisions, and I was about to find out just how dangerous Constance Blackwell could get. Constance's latest assault arrived disguised as official paperwork, dropped on my doorstep at dawn like a toxic love letter. Property boundary violation notice from something called Meridian Property Solutions, which sounded about as legitimate as a $3 bill. According to her fabricated survey, my backyard shed encroached 18 inches onto designated HOA common area, the same shed I'd built 3 months ago, perfectly positioned on my own property, now magically squatting on community land that had never existed. Immediate removal required within 30 days, the notice declared, or HOA will reclaim encroached area and assess restoration costs to homeowner. I walked outside to examine this supposed violation, morning dew soaking through my work boots as I paced off the measurements. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from Dorothy's kitchen window while I confirmed what I already knew. Constance had completely fabricated this boundary dispute, but fabrication was becoming her specialty. While I was measuring imaginary property lines, she escalated to physical sabotage. That afternoon, 3 contractors showed up claiming they needed to maintain the common area behind my house. I watched from my kitchen window as they systematically destroyed my fence posts and accidentally severed my sprinkler lines. The metallic clang of fence posts hitting concrete echoed across the neighborhood, while Constance directed operations from her driveway, arms crossed, that satisfied smile spreading across her face like poison. What she didn't know was that I'd been expecting exactly this move. 2 weeks earlier, I'd installed a professional security system, motion sensors, night vision cameras, cloud backup storage. Every moment of her property destruction was recorded in crystal clear detail, complete with audio of her instructing workers to remove all unauthorized structures. But I didn't confront her. Military training teaches patience, and cornered animals make predictable mistakes when you let them think they're winning. Instead, I made a phone call that would change everything. Patterson and Associates, I need the original survey plat for Maple Ridge Drive, circa 1974. $200, and 3 days later, I was spreading yellowed documents across my kitchen table like treasure maps. The original neighborhood development showed private lots extending to rear fence lines, with only utility easements for power and water access. No common areas, no shared spaces, no HOA land ownership anywhere. Constance had been collecting maintenance fees for 8 years to care for property that didn't exist. The taste of justice was bittersweet as I realized the scope of her fraud. Every monthly assessment, every landscape fee, every improvement charge, completely bogus. She'd been running a protection racket disguised as neighborhood improvement. But the real revelation came from researching recent property sales. 3 houses on our street were already in pre-foreclosure, banks desperate to unload problem properties. The Martinez family at House 4 had been driven out after Constance's harassment about their teenagers' basketball noise violations escalated to false CPS reports. They'd lost their home to foreclosure 6 months ago. That's when I started making different kinds of phone calls. Maple Ridge Investments, LLC, I told the bank representative, we're interested in distressed property acquisition in established neighborhoods. My first purchase was House 4, the Martinez property sitting empty since foreclosure. The sound of keys jangling in my hand as I walked through those hollow rooms felt like claiming the first piece of a chessboard. But more importantly, It felt like justice for a family destroyed by Constance's manufactured crisis campaign. What I hadn't expected was the emotional weight of it. Standing in the empty kitchen where Maria Martinez had packed her children's lunchboxes for the last time, breathing in the lingering scent of the pine cleaner she'd used to scrub everything spotless before losing her home, that hit harder than any violation notice. Constance wasn't just harassing neighbors, she was destroying families. That night, Dorothy knocked on my door with fresh cookies and knowing eyes. "Heard you bought the Martinez place," she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she belonged there. "That woman drove them out with lies and fake complaints. Maria cried for weeks." "Tell me everything," I said, pouring coffee that tasted like determination. Dorothy's stories painted a picture uglier than I'd imagined. Elderly Mr. Patterson being pressured to sell after his wife's funeral because grieving widowers can't maintain standards. Young couples fleeing after Constance's noise complaints targeted their crying babies. Families sacrificing dreams because one woman had weaponized bureaucracy. "She's not just greedy," Dorothy whispered, glancing toward Constance's house. "She's evil, pure and simple." While we talked, my phone buzzed with a text from the security company. "Motion detected at rear property line." I pulled up the live feed to watch Constance herself, flashlight in hand, examining the damage her contractors had caused. The harsh LED beam illuminated her face as she measured distances, calculated angles, planned her next assault. But what she was really doing was giving me more evidence. Every trespass, every property violation, every illegal boundary claim, all recorded in high definition. The rough texture of those original survey documents under my fingertips felt like holding her future in my hands. She'd escalated from petty harassment to property destruction to outright fraud, and she had no idea I was documenting every single crime. Time to start building the trap she'd never see coming. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my own stupidity. I'd been researching property records at the county courthouse for 3 days, trying to understand Constance's boundary fraud, when I made a rookie mistake. Typed Blackwell into the public records database instead of my own address. The computer screen flickered, then displayed a list that made my coffee taste like liquid gold. Mortgage records, lien filings, foreclosure notices, all public information, all devastating, all pointing to one inescapable conclusion. Constance Blackwell was financially dead in the water. $340,000 owed on a house assessed at $280,000. Second mortgage for $60,000 on something called Elegance Catering Solutions, apparently her failed attempt at a post-retirement business. The metallic taste of irony filled my mouth as I realized our HOA dictator was broke as a church mouse. But that was just the appetizer. Digging deeper into those records, I discovered a pattern that would make the FBI proud. Every family driven out of Maple Ridge Drive had sold to buyers connected with Meridian Property Solutions, the same fake company that had issued my bogus boundary violation, the same company registered to Constance's brother-in-law, Danny Meridian. The scam was beautiful in its simplicity. Target vulnerable families with harassment campaigns, manufacture violations and fines, pressure them into financial distress, then swoop in with below-market offers through shell companies. Flip the properties within months at full value. Pocket the profit margins. 11 families destroyed over 3 years. Profit per house ranging from $40,000 to $80,000. The Martinez family, the ones whose foreclosed house I just bought, had lost $60,000 in equity when Constance's harassment about their son's basketball noise escalated to false CPS reports and truancy complaints. They'd been so desperate to escape her torment, they'd accepted the first offer that came. An offer from Danny Meridian's company, 20% below market value. Sitting in that courthouse basement, surrounded by the musty smell of old documents and the fluorescent hum of government efficiency, I felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't just about HOA harassment anymore. This was about justice for families whose lives had been systematically destroyed by organized fraud. The taste of that courthouse vending machine coffee, bitter as regret and twice as strong, fueled my next 3 hours of research. I printed every document, photographed every record, built a case file that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Then I found the golden ticket buried in foreclosure filings from 18 months ago. Constance's foreclosure notice, temporarily delayed through financial hardship accommodation. She'd been living on borrowed time while destroying other families' financial stability. The irony was so perfect it hurt. But here's where it got interesting. The bank holding her mortgage was First National, the same institution that had foreclosed on the Martinez family and 2 other Maple Ridge properties. Banks hate problem borrowers, especially ones with histories of neighbor complaints and questionable side businesses. I made a phone call that afternoon that changed everything. First National Loan Services, I represent Maple Ridge Investments, LLC. We're interested in acquiring distressed mortgage debt in the Maple Ridge Drive area. The loan officer's voice perked up like a bloodhound catching a scent. Are you familiar with the Blackwell property? We've been looking for qualified investors to help resolve that situation. 20 minutes later, I had preliminary approval to purchase Constance's entire mortgage debt for 70 cents on the dollar. The smell of autumn leaves drifting through my truck windows carried the sweet scent of approaching justice as I drove home. While Constance had been busy filing false reports and destroying my fence posts, I'd been building a case against organized fraud. While she thought she was pressuring me to sell, I'd been planning to buy her house out from under her. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor darker than courthouse coffee, and sometimes that's exactly what justice looks like. The next week transformed my quiet retirement house into something resembling a military command center crossed with a caffeinated madman's fever dream. My dining room table disappeared under spreadsheets, property records, and enough legal documents to paper a small courthouse. The smell of fresh printer ink mixed with leftover Chinese takeout as I worked 18-hour days planning what I'd started calling Operation Neighborhood Justice. The scope was insane. Buy every house on Maple Ridge Drive except Constance's, then purchase her mortgage debt and foreclose on her personally. Total cost, roughly $2.8 million. Total satisfaction, priceless. But first, I needed funding that didn't exist in my military retirement account. That's when Dorothy mentioned her son Michael during one of our morning coffee intelligence briefings. 38, successful contractor, and apparently angrier than a hornet in a paint mixer about Constance's 8-year harassment campaign against his mother's bird feeders. She tried to fine Mom for excessive wildlife attraction, Michael explained, settling his 6-foot frame into my kitchen chair with coffee strong enough to wake the dead. For feeding cardinals. Who the hell finds somebody for feeding birds? I spread my acquisition plan across the table like battle maps from D-Day. Want to help me buy her house out from under her? Michael's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching religious enlightenment. How much are we talking? The numbers were staggering. 12 properties averaging $250,000 each, minus 3 foreclosures available at distressed prices. My half? Retirement funds and rental property equity. His half? Construction company credit lines and what he called righteous indignation financing. You realize this is completely insane? My attorney Patricia Wong said during our second emergency consultation. The fluorescent lights in her office buzzed like trapped insects while she reviewed contracts that covered her desk like legal snowdrifts. Is it illegal? Well, no, but will it destroy Constance's real estate scam? Patricia's pause stretched longer than a military funeral before she finally grinned. If you can coordinate simultaneous closings without her discovering the pattern, this would be the most expensive neighborhood acquisition in county history. And completely legal. The timeline was brutal. 14 days to close on 11 properties while maintaining operational security that would make the CIA proud. Each purchase required separate shell companies, Ridge Investment Holdings, Maple Street Properties, Drive Development LLC, Delaware Incorporation for privacy, local banking relationships, coordination between law firms that thought I'd suffered a psychotic break. I learned more about real estate law in 1 week than most people absorb in a decade. Back in my Army logistics days, I'd thought coordinating supply convoys through hostile territory was complicated. Turns out coordinating mortgage applications through suburban bureaucracy while maintaining secrecy makes combat operations look like checkers. The technical challenges were mind-numbing, title searches revealing decades of property disputes, mortgage applications requiring financial documentation that filled 3 briefcases, closing procedures more complex than launching space shuttles. The taste of energy drinks became my constant companion as I navigated banking regulations that seemed designed by sadistic accountants. But Dorothy proved invaluable as my neighborhood intelligence coordinator. She knew which families were secretly ready to escape Constance's tyranny, which properties had hidden foundation problems, and most importantly, when our target would be vulnerable. Constance visits her sister in Florida every month, Dorothy reported, spreading gossip like military intelligence over homemade cookies that tasted like victory. Third Thursday through Sunday, she'll be gone during your closing weekend. Perfect timing for what Michael had started calling Real Estate D-Day. The security preparations felt like planning a bank heist, except completely legal. Professional cameras installed on properties I already owned, legal documents stored in fireproof safes, backup copies distributed to 3 different law firms. If Constance tried interfering with closings, every move would be documented in high definition. But the emotional weight was heavier than any military operation I'd planned. This wasn't about territory or strategic advantage. It was about justice for families systematically destroyed by organized fraud. The Martinez children who'd lost their home to manufactured noise complaints. Elderly Mr. Patterson being pressured to sell while grieving his wife. Young couples driven away because their crying babies violated Constance's noise sensitivity. I'd started keeping a list of Constance's victims, photos and stories that reminded me why this mattered. Maria Martinez crying as movers loaded her children's belongings. Mr. Patterson's confusion when Constance claimed his memorial wind chimes created excessive noise pollution. Families sacrificing dreams because one woman had weaponized suburban bureaucracy. Late Thursday night, reviewing final contracts under lamplight that cast shadows across my makeshift war room, I realized something profound had shifted. 3 months ago, I'd moved here seeking quiet retirement. Now I was orchestrating the most complex real estate operation in county history to destroy organized neighborhood terrorism. The crisp autumn air through my windows carried the scent of burning leaves and approaching justice. In exactly 7 days, Constance would discover what happens when you systematically destroy families for profit. She thought she was driving out one quiet veteran. Actually, she'd picked a fight with someone who'd spent 20 years outmaneuvering people far more dangerous than suburban real estate fraudsters. Time to show her what real strategy looked like. Constance's financial panic reached full meltdown on a gray Wednesday morning when she tried to have my house condemned over a tomato garden. The emergency structural safety assessment notice appeared on my door at dawn, claiming my foundation had been compromised by unauthorized excavation. The unauthorized excavation? A 3 by 6 foot vegetable plot where I'd been growing tomatoes and basil behind my kitchen window. She was demanding immediate municipal inspection, potential condemnation proceedings, and emergency evacuation of my structurally compromised dwelling. The woman had officially crossed the line from petty harassment into full-blown psychological warfare. I was reading her latest masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction when Dorothy burst through my back door like a silver-haired missile, still wearing her bathrobe and clutching a violation notice that shook in her hands like autumn leaves. "Xavier, she's completely lost it," Dorothy gasped, collapsing into my kitchen chair. The smell of her vanilla perfume mixed with something sharper, pure fear. "She's claiming my bird feeders are biohazard attractions that spread disease. Animal control is supposed to come today." This wasn't random harassment anymore. Constance was carpet bombing the entire neighborhood with violations, hitting every family simultaneously like she was trying to create mass exodus before something, or someone, could stop her. But her timing revealed something crucial. She knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the scope, but somehow Constance had sensed the walls closing in. The taste of her desperation was metallic and sharp, like blood in the water. What she didn't know was exactly how close those walls had gotten. While she'd been busy manufacturing foundation violations, my property acquisition had accelerated beyond my wildest projections. 7 houses closed, 2 more scheduled for Friday, and Mrs. Patterson, bless her sweet soul, had agreed to sell after Constance tried citing her for excessive memorial wind chime noise pollution 6 months after her husband's funeral. "I'm done being terrorized by that monster," Carol Patterson had whispered during our secret coffee meeting. "Buy my house, burn down her empire, whatever it takes." The irony was perfect. Constance's harassment escalation was driving her final holdout neighbors directly into my arms. She thought she was pressuring everyone to accept her authority. Actually, she was gift-wrapping property sales for my shell companies. But desperate people make dangerous mistakes. That afternoon, while I was signing closing documents for house number 8, Constance deployed what she clearly thought was her nuclear option. A city utilities truck pulled up to my house, followed by her white Lexus and 3 workers carrying excavation equipment. "Gas leak emergency," the lead worker explained, approaching my front door. "Need to dig up your front yard to locate the source." I watched from my kitchen window as Constance directed operations from her driveway, pointing at my newly installed sprinkler system like she was targeting enemy positions. The metallic clang of shovels hitting concrete told me exactly what kind of gas leak they were investigating. She was trying to destroy my irrigation system right before my final mortgage applications were due. Missed those deadlines because of emergency repairs, and my entire acquisition plan could collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Too bad for Constance, military logistics taught me to always have backup plans for backup plans. "Gas company emergency line? This is Xavier Finley at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. Someone just filed a false emergency report to get city workers onto my property." The response was swift and beautiful. Within 20 minutes, a utilities supervisor was examining work orders with the kind of expression usually reserved for people discovering termites in their wedding cake. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Constance with professional calm that barely contained volcanic fury. "Who authorized emergency excavation based on this complaint?" Constance's face went through more changes than a traffic light having a seizure. Confusion, panic, rage, denial, all cycling faster than my washing machine's spin cycle. "There was a gas smell," she stammered, but her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. "Our instruments show 0 gas traces," the supervisor replied, holding up detection equipment that looked more sophisticated than NASA launch controls. "Filing false emergency reports is a criminal offense, ma'am. We'll need to document this incident." But the real beauty wasn't watching Constance's sabotage attempt collapse. It was realizing she'd just handed me the final evidence needed for criminal prosecution. False emergency reports, plus documented harassment, plus fraudulent HOA violations, equaled a federal case that could put her away while I completed my neighborhood acquisition. That evening, signing papers for house number 9, my phone rang with the sweetest sound in real estate history. "Mr. Finley, this is Janet Henderson. We heard you might be buying properties on our street." The Hendersons owned the corner lot, prime real estate that would complete my strategic encirclement. Selling to me meant escaping Constance's latest violation campaign targeting their children's basketball games. "We can close Friday morning," I said, trying to contain my excitement. "Perfect. That woman destroyed our family's peace for the last time. 10 houses down, 1 to go, plus Constance's mortgage debt scheduled for Monday morning purchase. While she'd been filing false emergency reports and terrorizing bird feeders, I'd been systematically buying her entire kingdom. The crisp October air carried the scent of burning leaves and approaching justice as I calculated final numbers. Constance thought her escalation was driving me toward surrender. Actually, she was counting down to her own eviction. Constance's last stand began with a bribery attempt disguised as a peace offering, delivered on the same Thursday morning I was scheduled to close on the final property that would give me control of her entire world. She appeared at my door at 7 a.m. sharp, perfectly coiffed as always, but with something desperate flickering behind her eyes like a dying light bulb. The smell of her overpowering perfume mixed with what I could only describe as the acrid scent of pure panic. "Xavier, I think we got off on the wrong foot," she began, holding a manila envelope that practically vibrated with desperation. "I'd like to make you an offer." Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000 and a mutual release agreement that would forgive all HOA violations in exchange for my immediate sale and departure from Maple Ridge Drive. The terms were laughable. She'd buy my house for $40,000 below market value through her brother-in-law's company. All violations would disappear, and I'd sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing our neighborhood disputes. "This is quite generous," I said, flipping through pages that read like a confession to 8 years of organized harassment. "I can make all your problems disappear," Constance continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper. "The city inspections, the violation fees, even the property tax assessments. I have connections that can adjust these things in your favor." The metallic taste of pure corruption filled my mouth as I realized she was openly admitting to bribery, tax fraud, and abuse of municipal authority. My phone was recording everything from my shirt pocket, capturing evidence that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. "That's very accommodating of you," I replied, setting her bribery package on my kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial. "But I think I'll pass. Constance's composure cracked like thin ice under pressure. "You don't understand the forces you're dealing with here. I've been managing this neighborhood for 8 years. I know people, important people, who can make your life very difficult." Translation: she was threatening to escalate her harassment through official corruption, using municipal connections to destroy anyone who wouldn't accept her authority. What she didn't realize was that she'd just confirmed every suspicion I'd developed about her political network. But Constance wasn't finished destroying her own credibility. That afternoon, while I was at the bank finalizing her mortgage debt purchase, she held an emergency HOA meeting without notifying me. According to Dorothy's intelligence report, Constance had gathered her remaining allies to vote on immediate assessment fees, targeting my property specifically. $2,000 for excessive water usage based on my tomato garden. $3,000 for unauthorized structural modifications, referring to my security cameras. $5,000 for community disruption caused by my confrontational attitude toward legitimate authority. $10,000 in manufactured fines, due immediately or face property liens that could interfere with any sale attempts. The beautiful irony? While she was busy fabricating emergency assessments, I was busy buying her house from the bank that held her mortgage. Every bogus fine she invented was being charged to someone who was about to become her landlord. But her final desperate move revealed just how completely she'd lost touch with reality. Friday evening, as I was reviewing closing documents that would make me owner of 11 houses plus Constance's mortgage debt, Dorothy called with urgent intelligence. "She's packing," Dorothy whispered into the phone. "Moving truck in her driveway, boxes everywhere. But here's the weird part. She's telling people she's going on vacation to visit her sister." Constance was planning to flee before her foreclosure deadline, probably hoping to avoid criminal charges and start her real estate scam somewhere else. The sound of her loading boxes echoed across the neighborhood like the hollow drumbeat of defeat. But running away wouldn't save her from federal wire fraud charges, and it certainly wouldn't stop my mortgage foreclosure proceedings. Saturday morning brought the sweetest sound in real estate history. My phone ringing with confirmation that all property purchases had closed simultaneously. 11 houses, purchased through 7 different shell companies, all recorded at the county courthouse within the same hour. The taste of total victory was sweeter than Dorothy's homemade apple pie as I walked outside to find "sold" signs appearing on every lawn except Constance's, and mine. That's when I noticed her watching from her window, face pressed against the glass like she was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing pieces. The confusion in her expression told me she was finally starting to connect dots, but far too late to matter. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wong, my attorney. "Mortgage purchase complete. Foreclosure proceedings filed. Eviction notice ready for service." The crisp autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and absolute justice as I realized the endgame had arrived. Monday morning would bring the HOA annual meeting, the perfect public venue for revealing who now owned her entire kingdom. While Constance had been busy threatening municipal corruption and filing fraudulent assessments, I'd been buying every house she claimed to represent. She thought she was escalating toward my surrender. Actually, she'd been counting down to her own public destruction. The moving truck in her driveway wasn't going to save her, because where she was going, she wouldn't need furniture. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for Monday evening at the community center, and Constance had been promoting it like a public execution. Mine. She'd sent personal invitations to every neighbor, promising to finally address the criminal element that has infiltrated our peaceful community. If only she knew how right she was about addressing criminals. The community center filled up like a courtroom for a high-profile murder trial. All 12 families from Maple Ridge Drive, plus several neighbors from adjacent streets who'd heard rumors about the big confrontation. Mayor Henderson's representative sat in the front row, flanked by a sheriff's deputy and 2 reporters from the local newspaper. Constance had arranged the folding chairs in rows facing a head table where she sat like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that institutional glow that makes everyone look guilty of something. The taste of anticipation was electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Constance began, standing behind her folding table decorated with printed photographs and official-looking documents. "We're here tonight to address a serious threat to our community's safety and property values." She'd prepared a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation about my pattern of violations, harassment of HOA leadership, and suspicious activities that she claimed demonstrated clear intent to disrupt neighborhood stability. The slides included photos of my security cameras, measurements of my tomato garden, and what she called evidence of coordinated resistance to lawful community authority. This individual, she continued, clicking to a slide showing my truck and house, represents everything wrong with today's society. No respect for rules, no consideration for neighbors, no understanding of the standards that make our community special. The room murmured agreement. Several people nodded. Margaret actually applauded. Constance's smile grew wider as she sensed victory approaching like a freight train loaded with vindication. Therefore, she declared, I motion that this board exercise its emergency authority to impose immediate sanctions, including property liens and potential legal action to remove this disruptive element from our neighborhood. That's when I stood up from my seat in the back row, briefcase in hand, and began walking toward the front of the room. Point of order, I said, my voice cutting through the murmur like a blade through silk. Before we discuss HOA authority, shouldn't we establish exactly who this board represents? Constance's confident expression flickered like a candle in a hurricane. Mr. Finley, you're out of order. Actually, I'm perfectly in order, I replied, reaching the head table and opening my briefcase. As the majority property owner in this HOA district, the silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. I spread 11 property deeds across Constance's presentation table like playing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Ladies and gentlemen, I own every house on Maple Ridge Drive except one. The gasps were audible. Margaret's mouth fell open like a broken gate. The mayor's representative leaned forward, studying the documents with growing amazement. Even the sheriff's deputy looked impressed. These deeds, I continued, show that Ridge Investment Holdings, Maple Street Properties, Drive Development Corporation, and 4 other companies have purchased every available property in this neighborhood over the past 3 weeks. All companies owned by the same person. I turned to face Constance, whose face had gone from confident pink to ghost white. Me. That's impossible, she whispered, but her voice cracked like thin ice. Sheriff's Deputy Williams can verify that all deeds are genuine, recorded, and legal, I said, nodding to the uniformed officer who was already examining the documents. All confirmed, Deputy Williams announced. These are legitimate property transfers. But I wasn't finished delivering bombs. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out a second folder, I've also purchased the mortgage debt on the one remaining property from First National Bank. The Blackwell residence at 1298 Maple Ridge Drive is now in foreclosure proceedings. Constance's legs gave out. She collapsed into her folding chair like someone had cut her strings, staring at the foreclosure notice I placed in front of her with the same expression people wear when watching their house burn down. This means, I announced to the stunned crowd, that as of this morning, I own or control every single property that this HOA claims to represent, which makes the previous 8 years of harassment, fraudulent violations, and manufactured crises particularly interesting. The room erupted, neighbors talking over each other, reporters scribbling frantically, the mayor's representative requesting copies of everything. But through the chaos, I could hear the sweetest sound in the universe. Constance Blackwell's world collapsing like a house of cards in a tornado. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, raising my voice over the commotion, the old management is hereby terminated. Anyone interested in discussing reasonable HOA policies that actually serve the community can stay for coffee and actual democratic discussion. As people surged forward to examine the deeds, I noticed Constance stumbling toward the exit, her perfect composure finally shattered like expensive china hitting concrete. Constance, I called after her, don't forget, you have 30 days to vacate. Eviction papers will be served tomorrow morning. The taste of absolute justice was sweeter than anything I'd ever experienced. The transformation of Maple Ridge Drive began within hours of Constance's public meltdown. By Tuesday morning, neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years were gathering on front lawns, sharing coffee and stories about 8 years of manufactured misery. I can't believe she's really gone, Dorothy laughed, standing in my kitchen while we watched Constance's moving truck load the last of her belongings. The smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the air as half the neighborhood had stopped by to celebrate what people were calling Liberation Day. Constance had fled without a word, leaving behind only a pile of unpaid bills and a forwarding address in another state. The criminal investigation would continue. Wire fraud charges don't disappear just because you change your zip code, but our neighborhood was finally free to heal. The new HOA structure emerged naturally through actual democracy instead of tyranny. Monthly dues dropped from $200 to $50, covering only essential maintenance. Violation notices became friendly reminders. Fines were abolished entirely, replaced by community work days where neighbors helped solve problems together. Mrs. Patterson planted a memorial garden where Constance's common area used to exist, filled with flowers that attracted the birds Dorothy loved feeding. The Henderson kids resumed their basketball games without fear of noise citations. Even Margaret, Constance's former enforcer, apologized for years of enabling harassment and volunteered to organize the first annual Maple Ridge block party in over a decade. The financial recovery was swift and satisfying. HOA bank accounts revealed $15,000 in misappropriated funds, which we redistributed as property improvement credits for families who'd been overcharged through Constance's violation scams. The Martinez house, my first purchase, became affordable housing for young families, rented at below-market rates to ensure economic diversity in our community. But the real victory was measured in smaller moments. Children playing freely in front yards without fear of noise complaints. Elderly neighbors receiving help with yard work instead of citations for maintenance violations. Families investing in their homes instead of living in constant fear of manufactured crises. I kept 3 houses as rental properties, sold 6 others to families who'd been driven away by Constance's harassment, and converted 2 into community resources, a neighborhood workshop where people could borrow tools and learn DIY skills, and a meeting space for local organizations. The Neighborhood Justice Scholarship launched 6 months later, funded by rental income and designed to help families fight HOA abuse in other communities. We partnered with the State Attorney General's office to identify corrupt HOA boards, providing legal resources and coordination for victims who felt powerless against organized harassment. Within a year, our story had sparked a national movement. Congressional hearings about HOA accountability, state legislation requiring financial transparency, documentary crews filming what they called the most expensive neighborhood coup in American history. But the real measure of success was simpler. Maple Ridge Drive became the kind of place where people actually wanted to live. The irony never got old. Constance's harassment had been designed to drive me away so she could profit from distressed property sales. Instead, her systematic cruelty had motivated me to buy her entire kingdom and transform it into everything she'd claimed to protect, a peaceful, thriving community where neighbors supported each other instead of living in fear. As I write this, 18 months later, property values have increased 15% across our neighborhood. Noise complaints have dropped to 0. The annual block party draws families from 6 surrounding streets, creating connections that strengthen our entire area. Constance Blackwell pled guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy charges last month, receiving 3 years probation and full restitution to her victims. She's prohibited from serving on any HOA board and required to complete community service helping seniors with home maintenance, perhaps the most poetic justice imaginable. But my favorite victory is smaller and sweeter. Every morning, I drink coffee on the same front porch where this whole story began, watching children play safely while their parents chat without fear. Dorothy's bird feeders attract more cardinals than ever, and nobody's measuring grass height or counting rose petals. Sometimes the best revenge is just building something better than what someone tried to destroy.